In this video, I'm going to take you behind the scenes of a film I recently shot in a magical place called Hong Kong. I'm going to show you how I planned this shoot, how we managed to film some secret spots. I'll tell you exactly what gear I used, how I color graded this entire thing, and much more. The story of my Hong Kong video started all the way at the beginning of this year, when I decided to make some pretty big changes. Just before I set out on this journey, I had arrived at a point in my life where I felt quite comfortable and kind of content with the way that things were. Before that, it felt like I wasn't really being challenged very much by my surroundings. Exactly at that moment, I decided to pack my bags, move out of my apartment in Amsterdam. Today's the day to say goodbye to my family and friends and to put all of my client work and other jobs on hold to go on a little adventure. And even though, especially at the beginning, things were far from easy and kind of terrifying at times, the last few months of traveling have taught me more than any self-help book or filmmaking job could ever have. And somewhere during my travels, I met a really talented group of young filmmakers that invited me on a spontaneous mission to a place I'd never been to before. We've somehow made it to Hong Kong. We're gonna be here for the next week or so. I'm not quite sure what we're gonna shoot, how I want to shoot it, or what story I'm gonna tell, but we're just gonna go along with the flow of the city and just see what happens. So the camera I took with me was the Sony FX3. I've been using this camera for the past few years. It's small, it's lightweight, it's reliable, it has super responsive autofocus, and if you kind of know what you're doing, it produces a really nice and flexible image. But in terms of lenses, I used my pretty much all-time favorite lens, the 24-105mm f4, mainly for the shots where I was walking through the city with a gimbal. Now this lens just has fantastic built-in stabilization and has a really versatile focal length. So if I'm making a wide shot because I want to showcase a specific location, but if someone walks past me that seems like an interesting subject, I can just quickly zoom in from 24mm all the way to 105mm and get a really nice tight close-up shot with that lovely compression. Now the lens that I used for probably 80% of this project is the 70-200mm f2.8 lens. This lens is just an absolute monster, and paired with the right filters, it just produces beautiful images with a lovely shallow depth of field and a really nice compression, which gives the people of Hong Kong this energy as if they're playing the main characters in their own movie, which I really liked. But it also creates a certain type of distance between your subject. It feels like we're an observer. It doesn't really feel like we're in the action. And since pretty much all of the people that I met and that I spoke to in Hong Kong felt a little bit distant, like I couldn't really connect with them on a deeper level. They were extremely hardworking and always super polite and lovely people, but I felt like there was always a little bit of a barrier there between me and my subject. That's why I felt this distance that this lens created actually matched the feeling of my own experience of Hong Kong perfectly. Now for this entire shoot, I actually used the Nisi Swift filter system. An ND filter, of course, is super important to use so that you can keep your shutter speed consistent. And the Promise filter that I use just adds a little bit of softness to the image. And all of the drone shots that you see in this video were all filmed with my DJI Mavic Air 3, which I used in the D-Log M color profile. This drone's affordable, lightweight, super easy to use, and definitely had filming permits for every single location that we visited in Hong Kong. Have you ever noticed that whilst you're watching your favorite movie, your eyes are automatically drawn to a very particular part of the image? Now this is because the cinematographers of these movies, they use a few very specific techniques to make you focus your attention on a certain part or character or element of the image. So here are a few framing and composition techniques that I used for my Hong Kong video, which you can use for your films too, if you want. No pressure. I thought that at the part where I talk about framing and composition, it might be cool to have a little interesting composition, but this just looks weird. I'm gonna change this up real quick. If you also pay attention to the lines in your shots, they too can subconsciously convey a ton of emotion to your viewer. Vertical lines in your shots, for example, they can give off a feeling of height, strength, and and power. And horizontal lines can give the viewer more of a feeling of calm and distance. Diagonal lines, for example, they can give more of an off-putting and unbalanced feeling to your image. And if you use these compositions and lines in your shots with a very clear intention, that can really take your work to a next level. To a final break of dawn. Now, just like with my Morocco film, which I shot at the beginning of last year, I really wanted this film to reflect my personal experience of traveling to Hong Kong for the first time. And I wanted it to be a little bit more like a diary entry that I could rewatch later on in my life, to see what my perspective and what my experience of Hong Kong was at this point in my life. You see that building up there? Wait, which one are we going for?
I don't know yet.
One of those buildings up there. We're going to try and find an entrance to one of them. Might turn out to be very exciting.
We'll see. Mission, guys. Step 1. Vlogging experience.
We just opened a couple doors, took a couple elevators.
Now we're here.
Guys, hitting rooftops in Hong Kong, it's not a hard thing. This is sick. Holy fuck.
However, going to a completely new place like this without having any script or voiceover or without having any idea of what you really want to shoot can feel a bit like you're feeling in the dark for the outline of an idea that may or may not eventually come. And this is why it's super important for me to at least do some sort of research into the history and culture of the place that I'm going to. I realized pretty quickly that even though this city has been portrayed on social media many times before as a vibrant, flourishing city with so much beauty, there's also quite a deep pain hidden inside of a lot of people that are living there because they have the feeling that their freedom is being taken away from them. Now, this was simply my perception of the situation there, and it might be completely different for someone else, but I could also kind of sense some hope. That kind of started guiding the main theme of the video. I thought that alone was quite an interesting thing to focus on. And most of the time, I don't really ask the people beforehand if I can film them, because that would make their initial reaction a lot less authentic. But once I've captured that shot, I always make sure to go up to the subjects, to show them the shot, and just to make sure that I get their permission to use the actual footage.
So for me, here's Morris, and here my handmade fish wallet. And this is color of Ferrari red. The inside color is carbon fiber, carbon fiber, carbon fiber, carbon fiber, all carbon fiber. I love carbon fiber.
During a day of shooting like this, I get to live through the eyes of hundreds of people from an entirely different culture that are going about their day and about their life. And that's really a way for me to slow down, and it makes the entire experience of traveling to a place like this so much more special and meaningful. And one thing that actually made a crucial difference is a software I've personally been using for pretty much all of my projects for over 4 years now, and it's called mFlare. And they have actually been a sponsor of my work before, and they're also sponsoring this video. mFlare is the perfect tool to organize, experiment with, and collect ideas for your creative projects in a super visual way. And so before I set out on my journey to Hong Kong, I started to collect all sorts of different types of reference links, of color palettes, of visual inspirations, locations, and much more. So that once I was on location filming, I could really quickly reference back to this collection of visual elements that I had to get inspiration for things around the city that I could focus my camera on. And I actually also used mFlare to script every single word of the video that you're watching right now. Now, if you're interested in trying mFlare out for yourself, it's actually completely free with no time limit, and there's a link down below in the description of this video. Now, a super important technical part of my filmmaking process was choosing the right frame rates and shutter speeds in camera. If I'm shooting an action scene, like in this kitchen, for example, which was, by the way, the only kitchen, I believe, that still cooks on a jet-fueled stove, which was really cool. In a scene like this, where I have some time to change and experiment with my camera settings, and then I really try to get a variety of frame rates so that later I have the flexibility of choosing between shots that I shot in 120 frames per second, for example, which convey a completely different feeling to shots done in 24 frames per second, for example. However, for shots where I don't have a lot of time in the moment to change camera settings, like when I'm walking through a busy city market street, for example, I have to intuitively make a decision in what context I would potentially use the shot that I'm capturing. So if I was filming someone stacking cardboard boxes in the street, then I would choose 24 frames per second because I knew that I would likely use that shot in a fast sequence of movements where I wouldn't use a lot of slow motion. However, if I was shooting someone staring at a fish tank, for example, or praying in a temple, I know that I'm much more likely to slow a shot like that down in the post-production because it would fit that solemn, slow, and sad emotion of that shot much better. They hold their breath and wait. Hoping for a spark that lights the fire. However, somewhere along my travels this year, I met a dude called Louis V. Who's also a really talented filmmaker, who actually really inspired me to break some more rules in my own creative process. Sometimes we would go out to shoot and he would leave his ND filter at home, and then he would shoot at 120 frames per second and just crank his shutter speed up all the way to 1,000th of a second. And he did that on purpose. And this surprisingly gave a pretty uniquely smooth result, which felt like something new and playful to me. And that just reminded me that once you know the rules, don't be afraid to break them every once in a while.
You know what we said yesterday? I love that. We're so good friends because we say yes to life.
We say yes to life.
Now, after about 3.5 weeks of editing this 2-minute Hong Kong video, this is exactly what my timeline looks like. As an editor, you really want to dive into your footage and get to know your shots like the back of your own hand. This is why I really make sure to spend some proper time going through all of the footage so that I really get to know its best moments and its flaws. I make sure to mark all of those moments so that later on, once I'm in the creative editing part, I can easily reference back to those markers that I made. Milanote was once again crucial to figuring out what the story of my film was at this stage. I create a new board in Milanote so that once I go through all of the raw footage, I can then write down notes and ideas here, and I can start to find and match snippets of sentences that I might use for the voiceover. Every time I would get an idea for a line of text that was triggered by a specific shot or by a specific combination of shots, I would make a note and add this to this slightly chaotic web of ideas. Once I had finished a first version of the edit, I would then start combing through this web of notes, trying to find some of my favorite parts, which I had already linked to some of the screen grabs of the footage that I had taken. I would then take my favorite parts, put them in order, and then it was a lot easier to fill in the gaps with the things that were still missing. Plus, I can structure everything, like I said, in a way that is super visual, which is really important for me because I can start making creative decisions and connections between the different parts of my story much quicker. Now, another super important part to make my shots feel like they have a bit of a deeper meaning is that I look for metaphors that can work in harmony with parts in my music, voiceover, and sound design. When I say the words haunted by the echoes of a distant past, it means that the people of Hong Kong are haunted or caged or imprisoned. And putting that sentence together with these 3 shots where the characters kind of look like they're in a cage or like they're being confined to a small space really gives a much stronger meaning to that sequence. Same thing goes for the shots that I used in the beginning of my sequence in reverse. Lonely figures wander with weary eyes. Instead of things moving forwards when it comes to the freedom and some of the rights of the people of Hong Kong, things are moving backwards and going in the opposite direction, literally and metaphorically speaking. Oh, and by the way, I recorded the voiceover itself with an $8,000 microphone, which is absolutely essential in getting your audio to sound crisp. Just kidding, of course. I actually just used my Notes app together with my iPhone and a sock to record this entire voiceover.
Better go! Audio check, check, 1, 2.
One of my favorite parts when it comes to creating a film from scratch like this is seeing how your color correction and your color grade can really take a kind of dull looking sequence and elevate it to a point where it looks so much more like a movie. The first step for me is to convert my footage from a log color space to a Rec 709 color space. I then color correct my footage for white balance and for exposure. Personally like to color correct my shots by referencing the vector scope tool. I then use the color wheels to make sure the colors are balanced by pulling the master color wheel in the opposite direction of the color information that the vector scope is showing on the screen. Together with some simple sound design, some clumsy VFX, and a little bit of secret sauce, this intro shot, for example, can go from something looking like this to something looking like this. Hidden amongst the shadows of a sleeping city, which immediately creates a much stronger feeling of mystery and anticipation for what's to come. Maybe the most important thing to making this shot look quite film-like is to overexpose by roughly 2 stops in camera and to then bring down your midtones in the post-production, and it just creates these super dense color and exposure values. I then add my own digital lens effect called the RGB split lens effect. I might add some vintage lens blur, also digitally, which in combination with each other just give a little bit of that vintage lens feeling. And don't be afraid to get a little bit creative creative. Like here with this final shot of the film, for example, where I really wanted to convey the emotion of a rising sun. However, since I didn't have the time to set up a time-lapse during our hike, I simply keyframed some white balance, color, and exposure changes in my shot. And I also used Motion VFX's Flare plugin for this. With that plugin, I just motion tracked a sun flare coming in from the side of the frame and created a sunrise from scratch that went together perfectly with the main message of the film.
You may yet find the light.
I've also included a free download to a few of my favorite FX3 and drone files that I've attached in the description down below. So if you want to practice your color grading with these shots, then feel free to do so. And if you're wondering why the f we're standing in a field surrounded by palm trees, then you should ask him, because I have no idea. Bye! And on a side note, I finally spent 3 to 4 months this year developing my very own secret sauce color grading collection, in which I break down my entire color grading process with 4+ hours of video episodes. I spent weeks learning how to properly create LUTs, building a website and a branding for them. I've included my lens effects, my RGB split and my vintage lens effect, some iPhone LUTs and more. I learned so much in the process of doing this, and I have to give an incredible thanks to all of you that have already purchased this collection. It literally means the world to me.
Amongst the shadows of a sleeping city, there are many that often go unnoticed.
For this Hong Kong video, I actually found an Asian sounding flute sample. And I altered those samples to match the key and the tempo of my music. And then I placed them throughout the soundtrack to more accurately represent that eerie, mysterious feeling that I was going for. Now, I take the final step of my sound designing process. Once my final edit is complete, I then go through all of the shots and add native sound design that works for that shot specifically. If there's a car driving past, I might use the audio that I captured in camera directly. I might also add some ambience to the shots, some background noises. You don't really have to stick to any rules. I often use the sound of something completely different to what my frame is actually showing. Just because it sounds similar or because it conveys a certain feeling.
You ready? 3, 2, 1, go. That just, yeah. Just terrible. That's just bad.
And one technique I actually only recently started using, due to the fact that I started taking DJing a little bit more seriously, is using an equalizer effect to create more tension in your sound. It's simply a tool with which you can control the different frequencies of your sound, so your lows, your mids, and your highs, and everything in between. And just before the drop in the music of this film, for example, I keyframed an equalizer to take out all of the lower bass frequencies of the music, so that once the drop or the climax of the film hits, I can bring them back in. And they then hit a lot harder compared to before, because we've created this space just before the drop.
To a final break of dawn.
A thing that was actually really refreshing for me during this Hong Kong mission was that I got to experience it together with a bunch of other really talented filmmakers, and seeing how they all had completely different styles of shooting, of enjoying the entire process. That really gave me a ton of new creative energy to experiment a bit more with my creative process. Plus, traveling together with friends just makes everything so much more fun.
Where are we, Brian?
Ting.
What's inside of it?
Should be thick and dense.
Yeah,
Holy moly.
And so I want to give a massive thanks and shout out to Julie, Nuno, Brian, Luke, and Hugo for inviting me along on this truly special trip. And also I have to give a special thanks to Samuel. Massive thanks to this legend over here for helping me.
Hey,
thanks, bro.
let's go. Welcome to Hong Kong, and Wait, you're leaving, so I'll see you soon.
For showing me around Hong Kong and for helping me shoot some behind the scenes. And I also have to give a very genuine thanks to Nicholas Crystal. Look who's out and about shooting again. Unbelievable. He also recently visited Hong Kong and shot a bunch of beautiful footage. And at a time in the edit where I needed 2 or 3 shots just to fill in the gaps, he was kind enough to let me use his footage. So huge shout out to him. And so yeah, maybe this is your sign to grab your camera or maybe even your phone. Just try to get inspired by some creators and by films or commercials online. Shoot some cool stuff and try to create something that you're proud of, that reflects the way in which you view the world around you, and who knows where it might eventually lead. So yeah, thanks for sticking around if you're still here, and I'll see you in the next one.
Alright, we made it.
Let's see. Yes.
This is...
What the?
This is never ending.